Assalamu alaikum. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I begin in the name of Allah, the God, whose mercy is profound, whose kindness is forever. In the last session, I mentioned the fact that the Quran, the way it has been presented as a book of God for the mankind, for the rest of the world, until the Day of Judgment, it's a book which has been marshaled, sequenced in a manner which is very different from the original sequence, historical sequence, when it was revealed. I mentioned that obviously considerable reflection, thought was given to the question as to why it happened. And finally, what we now have with us is hopefully an answer which is convincing, clear, and it's getting more and more interesting, involving, and hopefully enabling humans to get further guided by the Book of God as a consequence of this, call it, new discovery. The claim that the Quran is an extremely well-organized, coherent book, this claim has been divided into three parts. One part, the first claim is that each of the Quranic surahs, each of the 114 chapters, is revolving around one central theme, which is what is the basic idea that is to be presented in the surah, in the chapter, and different verses serve that purpose differently. The second claim is that amongst the 114 surahs of the Quran, with the exception of 108 surahs are divided into 54 pairs. And a third claim is that the entire Quran is arranged to be divided into 7 surah groups, each group beginning with one Meccan surah and ending with one Madan surah. Obviously, that explains everything, why this Quran has been designed, marshaled in the way it has been done now. But let me now, without spending more time on introducing the idea, let me give you the examples of the first case. That is, each Quranic surah has its own central idea, and all verses, they are contributing to that central theme one way or the other. This presentation and the next one are both going to talk about this subject. You see, the trouble while reading the Quran for somebody who is doing it casually without any preparation is that when you read Quran, you open a chapter, a surah, and you start reading its verses, you come across sudden shifts of topics. One subject giving way to another all of a sudden, and then to a third one without any apparent indication as to why it's happening, and so on. In order to understand why it actually happens, the Quran has already given us a very clear way of doing it, to do tadabbur, to reflect and ponder deeply. And probably that's one of the reasons why the Almighty has arranged the Quran the way it has been arranged now. When you read any chapter of the Quran, one of the exercises that one needs to do, or somebody else would do it for you, is that if the surah is long, I mean, it's not as brief a surah as those which have 3, 4, or 5 verses in them. They obviously put together make one subject, and all verses are contributing to that subject, to that theme. If you have a longer surah, you have to go for what we call paragraphing. Because there are several themes, several topics that are discussed. And we know that, in a modern way of expressing ourselves in writing, no matter what language we are writing in, we resort to paragraphing. one paragraph is talking about one subject. All sentences are actually talking about the same subject in a certain logical sequence if the author, the writer, is doing it properly. But then there is a shift, and one paragraph gives way to another and to a third one, and so on. We also know that it's not necessary that there should be a particular length of a paragraph. It all depends on whether a certain clear topic has been covered, and then there is a shift to another topic, and so on. So likewise, we need to do in all long, relatively longer surahs of the Quran, which really means in almost the majority of the surahs, that's what needs to be done. Once we are able to paragraph surahs, we are faced with a challenge. Why is one paragraph being followed by another paragraph? I mean, why are they coming adjacent to each other? On some occasions, I'm sure the answer would be very understandable and simple, because one paragraph is talking about a subject, and naturally that subject needs to be followed by another subject. But quite often, we won't have any apparent immediate answer. And that's what really would require serious reflection, investigation, discussion, brainstorming, etc. So let me give you a few examples to help you understand what the problem is and how the problems that I'm going to point out have been sorted out. In the second chapter of the Quran, the longest surah of the Quran, Surah Al-Baqarah, verses 34 to 39 are talking about a pretty well-known theme story of Adam and Iblis, Adam and Satan. The story is that the Almighty asked all angels, and it's also implied all jinns, to prostrate before Adam. And it's implied before Eve as well. All of them prostrated except for Iblis. He was from amongst the jinn. He refused. He was arrogant. He thought he was superior. He said, I am made of fire and Adam is made of clay, dust, mud. Why should I prostrate before him? My material, my reality, my background is better. The theme finishes. And all of a sudden, we find that from verse 40 onwards, there are paragraphs after paragraphs which are talking about the same theme, the different aspects of the same theme. From verse 40 to verse 141, long passage, obviously divided into different paragraphs, is talking about the invitation that the Almighty extended to the children of Israel, the Jews, to believe in the Quran and the Prophet, may God's mercy be on him, which we know that the Jews didn't do. They did not believe in the Prophet, except for a few people who actually accepted the invitation and sooner or later accepted the reality that the Quran is indeed God's word. Now, when you come across this sudden shift, you're surprised, probably disappointed. But then, when you give it a real thought, genuine deep thought, you realize that, wait a minute, there is something over there. Iblis refused to accept the Almighty's order, expectation, to bow down before Adam because he thought himself to be superior. The children of Israel are getting invited to accept Prophet Muhammad, God's mercy be on him, who belonged to the children of Ismail. Now, the children of Ishmael were also the descendants of Ibrahim alayhi salam. But somehow the children of Israel, who had the occasion, the experience of being the Almighty's representatives before the mankind, Shohada, his representatives, witnesses, for a period of 2,000 years, when they had prophets after prophets coming to them. And on the other hand, during these 2,000 years, the children of Ishmael were living in the Arabian Peninsula without knowledge of books and prophets and the Almighty's different messages that came down during this period. So the children of Israel thought that they were superior. And therefore, if the Almighty is asking them to accept the fact that there is a prophet of God coming to the children of Ishmael, there was the same arrogance that was stopping them from accepting this invitation. So the Almighty, before inviting the children of Israel to have faith in the Quran and the prophet who belonged to the children of Ishmael, narrated the story which the Jews already knew of Adam and Iblis, to let them know that if they are not going to accept this invitation because they think they are superior to the children of Ishmael, they are actually going to be doing the same thing which Iblis did by not bowing down before Adam. And the children of Israel knew what was the fate of Iblis, how Iblis was condemned by the Almighty for all times to come. So now you understand and you feel good about the fact that verses 34 to 39 have come before verse 40 onwards, verses 40 till 141. The apparent incoherence gives way to a very deep bonding between these two passages coming next to each other, and that happens because you think hard and think deep. That's what you find all throughout the Quran. That's what the exciting prospects are there waiting for us to plunge into this ocean of understanding and meanings of the Quran and to discover more and more such arrangements of wisdom that we have in the Quran. I'll give you another example. We find a similar difficulty in Surah Araf, Surah chapter 7, verses 57 and 58, followed by verses 59 onwards. And it's again a very long passage from 59 to 171. Now I'll tell you, what does the first passage say? Surah Araf, verses 57 and 58 are talking about a familiar, oft repeated theme that you find in the Quran, which is, the Quran says, وَهُوَ الَّذِي يُرْسِلُ الرِّيَاحَ بُشْرًا بَيْنَ يَدَيْ رَحْمَتِهِ. And it is He, that is God, who sends winds as good news, good tidings, بَيْنَ يَدَيْ رَحْمَتِهِ, before His mercy, before the arrival of His mercy. So, what the Quran is saying is that in the atmosphere of the Arabian deserts, the weather is hot, and then all of a sudden you have cool breeze coming down as a good news for the arrival of rainfall, which is to follow. حَتَّى إِذَا أَقَلَّتْ سَحَابًا ثِقَالًا, until when they have carried heavy rain clouds. سُقْنَاهُ لِبَلَدٍ مَيِّتٍ, we drive them to a dead land. فَأَنزَلْنَا بِهِ الْمَاءِ, and we send down rain. So clouds come and winds take away these clouds to different lands which are dead, dry, without any plantation. فَأَنزَلْنَا بِهِ الْمَاءِ, then we send down rain. فَأَخْرَجْنَا بِهِ مِنْ كُلِّ الثَّمَرَاتِ, and we bring forth thereby of all the fruits. That is, fruits, vegetables, crops, they emerge as a consequence of rainfall. كَذَلِكَ نُخْرِجُ الْمَوْتَى, likewise, we will bring forth the dead. لَعَلَّكُمْ تَذَكَّرُونَ, so that you may ponder, you may be reminded. That is, the rain comes, brings the different possibilities of sustenance, of crops and fruits, and also brings this understanding that God is fully capable of bringing back life to dead lands, Likewise, He is fully capable of raising the dead back to life when it will come to the occasion when they will be needed to be brought back to life for the purpose of accountability. The next verse says, وَالْبَلَدُ الطَّيِّبُ يَخْرُجُ نَبَاتُهُ بِإِذْنِ رَبِّي. And the good land, that is the fertile land, its vegetation emerges by the permission of its Lord. وَالَّذِي خَبُثَ. But as for the land which is bad, لَا يَخْرُجُ إِلَّا نَكِدًا. Nothing emerges except very ordinary crops, bushes, useless stuff. كَذَلِكَ نُصَرِّفُ الْآيَاتِ. Likewise, we send verses in different forms. لِقَوْمِ يَشْكُرُونَ. For those people who are grateful. So, now the Almighty is also explaining that the rain that falls from the sky brings forth crops, vegetation, etc. But there are different lands. There are lands that are fertile, responsive, and good bumper crop emerges. But there are others which are not fertile, and there is nothing that emerges except for ordinary material which is of no use. Okay, that's understandable. But now we move on, and what we find is that from verse 59 of chapter 7 till verse 171, the Almighty has shifted as if all of a sudden to a completely different theme, which is the messengers of God. They come to their respective nations, deliver the message. Some accept the message, others reject the message, and ultimately the Almighty's punishment visits the nation to destroy it. There are 6 messengers of God whose stories have been mentioned in the Quran over and over again. Why has it been mentioned so repeatedly? I'll talk about it later. But right now, let me mention their names. Nuh, Noah, Hud, Saleh, Lut, Lot, Shuaib, Musa, Moses alayhimus salam. May God's mercy be on all of them. All stories narrated either in long passages or relatively short ones. What you find is that it's the same theme that has been mentioned over and over again. Obviously, one wonders, why on earth is it that when there was a description of clouds, cloud formation, rainfall, crops sprouting from the land, it was mentioned, and then all of a sudden there is a new mention completely different from the earlier one that is taking over. Again, obviously it would be a matter of concern for the reader who would think about it and would reflect deeply and hopefully would find the answer by relating the two passages and their commonalities. The mention of rainfall in verses 57 and 58 is like the mention of the invitation of the prophets in the subsequent passages. Rainfall is a blessing of God coming from the heavens, from the sky. Material mercy, kindness of the Almighty in the form of water, in the form of plantation. On the other hand, the prophets bring divine revelation, and that is also a spiritual rainfall. It also falls on a soil. It's not that physical soil of the earth. It's the soil of the souls of humans. And it all depends, like in the case of land, in the case of human land, human soul, it all depends on the quality of soul. If the individual is good, then the spiritual rainfall, that is divine revelation, is going to bring forth crops and fruits in the form of faith, in the form of good conduct. But if the land is useless, the same spiritual rainfall, the same message, the same prophets, the same divine revelation is not going to bring forth anything but negative. So, what happens in the case of rainfall in the physical world is very similar to what happens in the case of the spiritual rainfall in the form of wahi, and that is what has caused the two passages to be put together. As I said, the entire Quran is full of such other examples, which if we look at them deeply, we'll find that these passages come together because of good reason. I'll give you more examples in the next session as well of the same interesting and exciting understanding that has emerged as a consequence of the understanding that there is thematic and structural coherence in the Quran. I hope you join me in the next session as well.